It began on a cold, quiet evening when Daniel Hayes, a humble single dad with tired eyes and a gentle heart, sat at the kitchen table helping his daughter Emma practice vocabulary words, the warm yellow glow from the hanging lamp filling the small room with a peaceful softness that made the rest of the world feel far away. Outside, the street was calm, the neighborhood wrapped in a blanket of silence except for the faint hum of porch lights flickering along the row of identical houses. Daniel lived a simple life: home, work, Emma, repeat, and he preferred it that way, especially after losing his wife 3 years ago. But that peaceful rhythm shattered the moment someone knocked on the door. 3 fast knocks followed by one slow, heavy knock that echoed through every wall like a warning. Emma lifted her head, startled. Daniel felt his heart tighten, something inside telling him this was not a normal visit, not a friendly neighbor asking for sugar or returning a borrowed tool. This was something else, something desperate. He pushed his chair back slowly and walked toward the door, the house suddenly feeling too still, too tense. When he opened it, the cold air rushed inside, and Daniel froze where he stood. There, shivering in a thin sweater, stood Mrs. Clara Reeves, a woman he only knew from quick waves and polite nods during morning school traffic. But the woman on his doorstep was not the calm, well-dressed neighbor he remembered. Her hair was messy, strands stuck to her cheeks from dried tears. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and the left side of her face was bruised so deeply blue and purple that it looked painful to even blink. Her lower lip was cracked, and her voice broke apart as she whispered, "Please, I didn't know where else to go. Help me, please." For a moment, Daniel felt his breath stop. It was as if time itself paused, holding its hands tight around the moment. He had seen injuries before. Working construction meant accidents happened, but this bruise was different. This bruise was shaped by cruelty, not clumsiness. Emma stood behind him, clutching her pencil, her face filling with worry as she whispered, "Dad, what happened to her?" Daniel gently reached out, touching Clara's shoulder. Her entire body flinched like a scared animal. "Come in," he said quietly. "Please, come inside before anyone sees you." He guided her in as gently as he could, supporting her as she nearly collapsed into his living room. Emma hurried to bring a blanket while Daniel helped Clara sit down on the couch. But as he shut the door, he happened to glance across the street, and his stomach tightened again. On the porch opposite his house stood HOA President Marjorie Collins, wrapped in her thick winter coat like some sort of neighborhood judge. Her sharp eyes narrowed with a cold curiosity that made Daniel's skin crawl. She lifted her phone slowly, deliberately, recording every second as if she had been waiting for a moment like this. Marjorie loved control more than anything. Loved watching, loved judging, loved twisting stories into power. Daniel knew she would not see a woman in danger. She would see drama, scandal, rule violations, and a chance to tighten her grip on the neighborhood. And the way she watched, unblinking, made Daniel's chest fill with dread. Because it wasn't just a scared woman who had appeared on his doorstep tonight. It was trouble, big trouble. The kind that spreads like wildfire in neighborhoods run by ruthless HOA presidents. Daniel shut the blinds and locked the door. His heart hammered against his ribs with a mix of fear and anger. He sat beside Clara, speaking softly. "You're safe here. Just breathe. Tell me what happened when you're ready." Clara tried, but her voice caught in her throat. Tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks, her whole body shaking. Emma placed the blanket around her shoulders gently, then sat close beside her, holding her hand with the natural kindness of a child who didn't need explanations to know someone was hurting. Finally, Clara whispered, "I didn't want to come here. I didn't want to involve you, but I didn't know what else to do." Daniel nodded slowly, letting her speak at her own pace. "You're not in trouble," he promised. "Just tell me what you need." Clara took a shaky breath, then lifted her face slightly, wincing from the pain. "My husband," she whispered. "He got angry again, worse than ever. He took my phone. He broke things. He said nobody would believe me." She swallowed hard, voice trembling. "And the HOA? They always cover for him. They always say I'm dramatic or confused, or that I misunderstood him." Daniel felt anger rising in his chest. Not loud anger, but the quiet, deep kind that comes from seeing injustice too close to home. He remembered times when he had seen Clara's husband yelling during HOA meetings, how Marjorie always defended him, calling him a respectable man and a valuable board member. Now those memories twisted into something darker. Clara continued, "He left to cool off. I ran. I didn't know where to go. Your house felt safe." Her voice broke again, and she buried her face in her hands. Daniel put a supportive arm around her shoulders, careful not to touch her bruised cheek. Emma leaned close to Clara, whispering, "You're safe here, okay?" But outside, Marjorie remained on her porch like a hunter watching prey, recording with slow, calculated movements, already planning to twist the story into something ugly. Daniel knew it. He could feel it. And deep inside, he felt a shift, like a door in his heart opening to a part of himself he had buried after his wife passed. A protector, a fighter, someone who would not let fear or neighbors or HOA committees decide what was right. As the heater hummed and the shadows on the walls flickered softly, Clara whispered one more thing, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. He will come looking for me." Daniel tightened his jaw. The storm had already started. And he knew one thing for certain. Whatever was coming next, he would not let this woman face it alone. Clara sat on Daniel's couch wrapped in Emma's small blanket, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the warm mug Emma gave her, and the quiet of the living room felt heavy, like the whole house was listening. Daniel sat in the armchair across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with the calm patience of a man who had seen grief before, a man who understood pain even when no words were spoken. Emma sat beside Clara, rubbing her arm gently in that innocent way only children can comfort someone, and every now and then she looked up at Daniel with wide eyes, silently asking if everything would be okay. Daniel wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise safety. But something deep inside his chest told him that tonight was only the beginning of something much larger, something darker. Clara lifted her eyes slowly, and when she spoke again her voice broke, like each word hurt to say. "He didn't used to be like this," she whispered, staring down at her bruised hands. "He used to bring me flowers. He used to open doors for me. He used to care." Her voice shook harder, and tears slipped silently down her cheeks. But ever since he joined the HOA board, he changed. He likes the power, the respect, the control. Daniel clenched his jaw without meaning to, the muscles tightening as he listened. He knew her husband, not personally but enough to recognize the type. Loud, confident, always speaking over people, always pretending to be the hero, always standing too close to Marjorie during meetings, whispering in her ear while she nodded like his shadow. Daniel had seen the arrogance in the man's eyes many times, but he never imagined the darkness behind it. Clara continued, wiping her cheek with shaking fingers. "They protect him, you know? Marjorie and the rest of them. They always say he's good for the community. They ignore the yelling. They ignore the broken things. They ignore me." She lifted her head, and the look in her eyes made Daniel's stomach twist, half fear, half hopelessness. "I tried to leave once," she whispered. "They convinced me to work it out. They said a divorce would ruin the community image." Daniel felt something burn inside him, a cold anger he hadn't felt in years. Emma frowned deeply, her little voice soft but firm. "That's not fair," she said, sounding older than her age. Clara let out a weak laugh, one filled with pain. "Nothing has been fair for a long time." She looked toward the shuttered window, fear widening her eyes as if she expected someone to break through it any second. "He will be angry when he realizes I'm gone," she said. "He always knows where I go. They always tell him." Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Not this time." Clara's breath caught. "Marjorie already saw me coming here," she said, her voice cracking. "She was recording. She'll twist it. She always twists things." Daniel looked toward the front door, imagining Marjorie still standing there with her cold eyes and her phone glowing like a weapon. "She can record whatever she wants," he said. "You're not going back there tonight." For the first time, Clara's face broke into real panic. "But she'll tell him," she whispered. "And he'll come." Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't look away. His voice came out calm, but there was steel in it, an edge no one had heard from him since the day his wife died. "Let him come," he said. "You're safe here." Emma nodded proudly beside him, as if she had decided the same thing. Clara covered her mouth, overcome with emotion, because no one, no neighbor, no friend, not even family, had ever spoken those words to her with such certainty. And outside, in the freezing night air, Daniel's porch light flickered gently as shadows moved across the street. Clara didn't see them. Emma didn't see them. But Daniel did. And the way his eyes hardened for a moment said it all. He already knew trouble was coming down that very street. But he also knew one more thing. This time, Clara wouldn't face it alone. Night settled over the neighborhood like a heavy blanket, the kind that makes every sound sharper and every shadow longer, and inside Daniel's house the air felt tight with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Clara sat on the edge of the couch, twisting her fingers together, her eyes constantly darting toward the window even though the blinds were shut, and Emma sat beside her quietly drawing on a notepad, glancing up every few seconds to make sure Clara was still okay. Daniel paced slowly in front of the door, the soft creak of the old floorboards the only sound in the room, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't shut off. What if Clara's husband came storming onto the porch? What if Marjorie had already twisted the story into a lie? What if the HOA board decided to investigate him? What if the entire neighborhood turned against him before anyone knew the truth? He knew how this place worked. He had lived here long enough to see rumor travel faster than any car on the street. He paused and looked at Clara, really looked at her. The way her hands shook even when she tried to hide it, the way her lip quivered every time a car passed outside, the way her bruised cheek seemed to pulse with fear. She wasn't just scared of her husband. She was scared of the people who protected him. She was scared of the HOA. She was scared of being silenced again. Daniel sat down across from her, his voice soft but carrying a weight that made Clara lift her eyes. "Clara, you're safe here. No one is going to hurt you." But the words hit something inside her, something raw and broken. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He has friends. He has connections. And Marjorie will spin this however he wants." She hugged the blanket tighter around herself. "Last time I called the police, they asked him what happened. Not me. And the HOA told everyone I was stressed and confused." Pain flashed across her face as she remembered, her voice shrinking like a candle flame in the wind. "They made me feel like I was crazy." Daniel felt a rush of anger so sharp it made his chest tighten. "You're not crazy," he said firmly, his tone steady like a rock. "You're hurt and scared, and you're telling the truth." Clara's eyes filled again, but this time she didn't look away. She let his words sink into the parts of her soul that had been ignored, dismissed, and silenced for too long. Emma reached out and touched Clara's hand gently, her little voice warm and honest. "My mom used to say, good people don't let bad things happen in silence." Clara's lips trembled at the kindness, at the simplicity, at the purity of those words. Daniel felt something in his heart shift, pride and sorrow mixing together as he looked at his daughter. But before the warmth could settle, the sound of slow, heavy footsteps echoed outside on the sidewalk. All three froze. Daniel moved to the window, lifting the blinds just a centimeter, and his entire body stiffened. Across the street, standing under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, was Clara's husband. His hands were shoved into his coat pockets, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the houses like a wolf sniffing the wind. And beside him, holding her phone like a shield, was Marjorie, whispering sharply into his ear as if giving instructions, as if planning something bigger than the bruises already on Clara's face. Clara covered her mouth to hide a sob, her entire body shaking. Daniel lowered the blinds, inhaling slowly, forcing calm into his voice. "They're looking," he whispered. Emma's hand tightened around Clara's. Clara whispered, "He will knock. He always knocks." But Daniel shook his head. "Not tonight. because something about the way the husband stared at the houses felt wrong, cold, calculating, dangerous. And the fact that Marjorie stood beside him, pointing toward Daniel's home as if marking it, made the fear inside the room thicken into something almost physical. Clara leaned closer to Daniel, whispering, "If he finds me here, he'll say you took me. He'll twist it. He always twists it." Daniel looked at her, and something in his eyes changed, like a door had opened inside him, just as it did the night he stayed awake for months protecting his dying wife. A quiet strength rose from his chest, one that didn't need shouting or threats. "Clara," he said softly but firmly, "I don't care what he says. I'm not letting him hurt you again." And just as those words left his lips, there was a new sound outside, the unmistakable crunch of angry footsteps heading straight toward Daniel's porch. Clara's breath hitched. Emma hugged her tightly, and Daniel stood tall, shoulders squared, jaw set, as he walked toward the door, ready for whatever was waiting on the other side, ready to protect a woman no one else would protect, ready to face the storm that had been building long before she knocked on his door. The knocking didn't come gently or politely. It slammed against the door like a fist full of anger, each hit shaking the small house as if it were made of paper, and Clara jumped so hard she dropped the mug she was holding. The sound of shattering ceramic echoing across the living room like a warning shot. Emma gasped and scrambled closer to her father, clutching the back of his shirt with trembling fingers, while Clara pressed herself against the arm of the couch, her body curling in on itself as if she could shrink away from the danger she knew all too well. Daniel stood frozen for a heartbeat, listening, feeling the rage on the other side of the door like heat leaking through the wood, and he breathed out slowly, forcing himself to stay calm even though every nerve in his body screamed to prepare. "Daniel Hayes!" The voice roared from outside. Clara's husband's voice, thick with fury, alcohol, and the kind of entitlement that believed the world owed him obedience. "Open this damn door." Clara covered her ears, whispering, "Please don't open it. Please, please." Her voice cracking under the weight of memories she never wanted to relive. Daniel placed a protective arm around her, then gently moved Emma behind the wall so she couldn't be seen if the door opened. The knocks came again, harder, louder, making the porch boards shake. "I know she's in there," he shouted, and Daniel could almost see the twisted expression on his face without even looking. Then, softer but more dangerous, Clara's husband growled, "If you don't open this door, I'll go through a window." Daniel's jaw tightened. He stood straighter. Something inside him, something he'd buried since the night he held his wife's hand for the last time, rose like a wave. An instinct to protect, to shield, to fight if he had to. He walked to the door and pressed his hand against it, feeling the vibrations of the man outside. "Leave," Daniel said, voice low but strong. "You're not welcome here." There was a pause and then a chilling laugh, a laugh full of mockery and venom. "She's my wife, not yours. You don't get to hide her." Marjorie's voice suddenly cut through the night, sharp and poisonous. "Daniel," she shouted from the porch, "you are interfering with a marital matter. The HOA can fine you for this and even request legal action." Her words were soaked in smug satisfaction, as if she enjoyed every second of Clara's fear, as if this was entertainment for her. Clara let out a soft sob, shaking uncontrollably now. Emma peeked around the corner and whispered, "Dad, are they going to take her?" Daniel turned just enough to see his daughter's terrified eyes, and something inside him snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. He would not let anyone, not a violent husband, not a cruel HOA president, not a single neighbor, decide what happened inside his home. He unlocked the deadbolt slowly, and Clara gasped, "No, Daniel, please, he'll hurt you." But Daniel shook his head, his voice steady. "No one is hurting anyone tonight." He opened the door only a few inches, keeping his foot braced against the floor in case the man tried to force it open. Clara's husband stood inches away, his face twisted with anger, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Marjorie hovered behind him, her phone raised like a weapon, recording everything with greedy eagerness. "Where is she?" the man demanded, pushing against the door, but Daniel didn't move an inch. Not yours to hurt, Daniel said quietly, the calm in his voice more powerful than any shout. She's safe here. The man's face turned red, veins bulging in his neck, and he slammed his palm against the door so hard Emma screamed from behind the wall. Daniel didn't flinch. Get off my property, he said, voice now low and icy. Now. Or what? The husband snarled. You gonna fight me? Daniel stared at him in silence, his steady gaze more intimidating than any threat. And for a single second, the man hesitated, just long enough for fear to flicker in his eyes. But Marjorie stepped forward, her voice venomous. Call the police, she hissed. Tell them he's keeping your wife hostage. Daniel's blood ran cold. Clara covered her mouth, realizing how fast the situation could twist against them. Emma whimpered from behind the wall, and the husband smiled. A sick, satisfied smile, because he knew Marjorie was right. All he needed was a phone call, and the whole story could flip against Daniel in seconds. But before he could reach for his phone, a loud voice echoed from the end of the street, firm, commanding, and unmistakable. Step away from that house. All three turned. A police car rolled slowly to a stop, lights flashing, but no siren, just a calm, authoritative presence. And the man stepping out wasn't just any officer. It was Sheriff Langley. Clara gasped. Daniel exhaled. And for the first time that night, real fear flashed across her husband's face. Sheriff Langley's boots hit the pavement with a slow, heavy authority that made the entire street fall silent. The kind of silence that creeps into bones and warns everyone that something serious has shifted. And Clara's husband instantly straightened his back, wiping the twisted anger off his face and replacing it with fake innocence, the same mask he had used for years to fool neighbors and HOA members. Marjorie, however, didn't drop her phone. She held it higher, as if she could somehow twist even the sheriff's arrival into a weapon. But Langley wasn't fooled. His sharp eyes scanned the bruise on Clara's face through the narrow opening of the door, and then he looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. The way a man does when he's evaluating character, danger, and truth all at once. Daniel didn't flinch. He kept one hand braced against the door, blocking Clara from view because every instinct inside him screamed that this moment was the thin line between safety and harm. Sir, Clara's husband began, his voice suddenly smooth, sugar-coated, the tone of a practiced liar. My wife is inside that house without permission. This man is refusing to let her come home. But Sheriff Langley raised one finger, shutting him down with calm, deadly precision. I didn't ask you, he said, and the coldness in his voice made Clara's husband swallow hard. Langley turned to Daniel next. Is she okay? Daniel nodded once, but the tension in his jaw spoke louder than words. She's scared, Daniel said quietly. And hurt, Marjorie gasped dramatically, clutching her chest as if the truth personally offended her. Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding, she said with a fake smile so tight it looked painful. He is interfering with a married couple's private matter, and the HOA has the right to intervene for the sake of community peace. Langley turned his head slowly, and the look he gave her could have frozen fire. Ma'am, he said, the HOA has the right to fix broken sprinklers and repaint mailboxes, not to decide who is safe in their own home. Marjorie's mouth dropped open, the phone wobbling in her hand. Clara's husband stepped forward, his voice rising with fake outrage. My wife belongs with me. She's unstable. She makes things up. But the sheriff stepped past Daniel and pushed the door open wider, revealing Clara sitting on the couch clutching the blanket around her, tears streaming silently down her bruised cheek. The moment her husband saw her, his face twisted, not with concern, but with the panic of a man losing control. He took a step toward the door, but Daniel blocked him instantly, his body becoming a wall of calm fury. Sheriff Langley raised his voice, sharp and commanding. Do not move toward her. Clara's husband froze, his eyes flickering between the sheriff's badge and Daniel's unwavering stance. Ma'am, the sheriff said gently, did he do this to you? Clara's lower lip trembled, and for a moment she couldn't speak, years of fear wrapping tight around her throat. But then Emma stepped beside her, placing a small hand on Clara's knee, and that simple touch cracked something open inside her. "Yes," Clara whispered. "He did." The words hung in the air like a lightning strike. Clara's husband's face drained of color. "She's lying," he snapped, his voice cracking under the pressure. "She always lies when she's upset. Ask Marjorie, she knows." But Marjorie stepped back now, her face pale, realizing that the story she thought she could control was slipping away like water through her fingers. I didn't know she was hurt," she muttered, her confidence dissolving. Sheriff Langley took a step closer to Clara's husband, his voice low and steady. "Turn around." The man stared at him in shock. "No, you can't." "Turn around," the sheriff repeated, his hand already hovering near his cuffs. The husband looked to Marjorie for support, but she backed away another step, holding her phone like a useless shield. He looked at Daniel next, but Daniel didn't move, didn't blink, didn't offer even a sliver of sympathy. He was done watching Clara suffer. Sheriff Langley took his arm and twisted it behind his back with expert ease, snapping the cuffs on as the man shouted protests that fell flat in the freezing air. "You can't do this. I'm on the HOA board. I know people." But the sheriff only tightened the cuffs. "And now," he said calmly, "you know me." Clara let out a shaky breath, a sound so full of relief and exhaustion that Daniel felt it in his own chest. Emma ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist as if she could hold all the broken pieces together. Daniel closed the door softly, shutting out the cold night, shutting out Marjorie's shock, shutting out the lies, the noise, the fear. Inside the warm little house, Clara finally broke down. Not from pain, but from the weight of finally being believed. And Daniel silently thanked every star in the sky that Sheriff Langley showed up when he did, because if he hadn't, tonight could have ended very differently. When the patrol car finally drove away with Clara's husband in the back seat, the blue and red lights fading into the cold night, the entire neighborhood seemed to exhale at once, but inside Daniel's house the air still felt heavy, trembling with everything that had just happened. Clara sat on the couch with her face buried in her hands, her body shaking not from fear anymore but from the sudden collapse of years of held-in pain, as if her soul had been carrying a weight so heavy that now, finally released, she didn't know how to breathe without it. Emma sat beside her, small hands wrapped tightly around Clara's arm, whispering, "It's okay now, he's gone," in a soft voice that carried more comfort than any adult had ever given her. Daniel stood near the window, watching the last flash of police lights disappear over the hill, his jaw tense, his heart pounding in a slow, stubborn rhythm that carried both relief and anger. Relief that Clara was safe tonight, anger that she ever had to come to a stranger's house because the people who should have protected her instead chose to protect her abuser. Outside, neighbors peeked through their blinds, their curious eyes flickering like ghosts, whispering among themselves, shocked at what they had just witnessed. But Daniel didn't care about them. Not anymore. Tonight wasn't about gossip or HOA rumors. Tonight was about a woman finally being seen, finally being believed. Sheriff Langley stepped back inside for a moment, his boots leaving small marks on the wooden floor as he approached Clara gently. "You're staying here tonight," he said quietly, with the steady authority of a man who meant every syllable. "You'll be safe." Clara looked up, tears streaking down her bruised cheek, her voice barely a breath. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would listen." The sheriff gave a small, tired nod. "People like him depend on silence," he said. "But silence ends the moment someone brave does the right thing." His eyes flicked toward Daniel in a way that made Daniel's chest tighten. Not with fear, but with a quiet, fierce pride he hadn't felt in a long time. Clara wiped at her tears, her voice breaking again. "He's going to be so angry when he gets out," she whispered, fear leaking into her words. Daniel walked over, kneeling beside her so she didn't have to lift her eyes so high, his voice strong in a way that wrapped around her like armor. "He won't be coming near you," he said. "Not while I'm here." Clara let out a trembling breath, as if those words were a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Emma nodded firmly beside them. "Dad doesn't let bad people win," she whispered, and the sincerity in her small voice made Clara break into a soft, painful sob. Sheriff Langley stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "Daniel," he said, "I'll be filing a full report. This won't disappear. And the HOA is not to interfere with this case. Not one of them." His eyes hardened as he glanced at the door, thinking of Marjorie still standing outside like a statue of guilt and regret. "I'll be speaking with them tomorrow," the sheriff added. Their behavior tonight crossed every line. Clara trembled, hugging the blanket tighter. "Marjorie, she'll twist everything. She always does." But Daniel shook his head gently. "Not anymore." She saw what she needed to see. And for the first time since arriving, Clara looked around the room not with fear but with something tender, fragile hope. Sheriff Langley placed a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder before heading toward the door. "Keep the doors locked. I'll have a patrol car pass by during the night." Daniel nodded, grateful. The sheriff stepped outside, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to seal out the darkness for good. The house fell quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't terrifying. It was healing. Clara leaned back against the couch, exhausted, her breathing beginning to steady as Emma rested her head gently against her arm. Daniel sat across from them, rubbing his tired face, and for a long moment none of them spoke. They didn't have to. Everything that needed to be said was already in the air. The fear, the relief, the promise of safety, the beginning of something new. And as Clara lifted her eyes toward Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper, "Why did you help me?" Daniel looked at her with quiet sincerity, his voice low and warm. "Because no one helped my wife," he said. "And I won't let that happen again." Clara covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain this time, but from gratitude so deep it made her tremble. Emma wrapped her arms around Clara's shoulders gently, and for the first time in years, Clara felt the smallest, most delicate flicker of safety. Like a match struck in the dark, tiny but alive, morning came quietly, slipping into Daniel's house like soft gold through the curtains, painting warm lines across the living room where Clara had finally fallen asleep curled up on the couch with Emma resting beside her like a tiny guardian. And for the first time in many nights, the bruise on Clara's face wasn't the first thing she thought about when she opened her eyes. Instead, she heard the gentle clatter of Daniel making breakfast in the kitchen, the smell of warm pancakes filling the air, the familiar creak of old floorboards that somehow felt safer today than they ever had before. She sat up slowly, wincing slightly, but her heart felt lighter. A strange, unfamiliar feeling, almost like breathing without fear for the first time in years. Emma ran to her with a bright smile, sliding onto the couch beside her. "You slept a long time," she whispered, giggling softly. "Dad made extra pancakes because he said you need good food after a scary night." Clara felt her eyes burn with fresh tears, not from pain this time, but from the overwhelming kindness she had never expected from this small family. She brushed Emma's hair back gently. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, her voice tender. When she looked toward the kitchen, Daniel turned with a faint smile, holding 2 plates. He didn't say much, he didn't have to. Everything he had done last night spoke louder than any words. They ate together quietly, the kind of quiet that felt peaceful instead of frightening. And with every bite Clara felt pieces of herself settling back into place, like a broken vase carefully being put back together. But the peace didn't last long. A car door slammed outside, sharp, loud, startling. Clara jumped, fear flashing across her face. But Daniel was already moving toward the window, calm, prepared. "It's okay," he said softly. "Just the sheriff." When Sheriff Langley stepped onto the porch, Marjorie was right behind him, but she wasn't holding her phone today. She wasn't talking. She wasn't smirking. Her clipboard was gone, her confidence gone with it. She stood there like a child who had been caught doing something terrible, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep. When Daniel opened the door, the sheriff nodded. "Morning," he said. "How's everyone doing?" Clara stepped forward, holding the blanket around her shoulders, her voice soft but steady. "Better," she said. "Thanks to Daniel." Langley gave a small approving nod. Marjorie swallowed hard, stepping closer, her voice trembling. Clara, I didn't know. Clara's face softened, but she didn't look away. You didn't want to know, she said quietly. And that hurt more than the bruise. Marjorie's eyes filled with tears. She reached up to wipe them quickly, embarrassed. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought keeping the neighborhood perfect meant controlling everything. I forgot people were hurting behind closed doors. Clara hugged the blanket tighter, every breath shaky but brave. I wasn't asking for perfection, she said. I was asking for help. The sheriff cleared his throat, looking between them. The HOA board is being suspended for investigation, he said. Your husband will face charges. And Clara, you're getting a protection order today. Clara nodded, tears spilling silently as relief finally took full shape inside her chest. Emma reached out and took Clara's hand, squeezing gently. You're safe now, she whispered, and Clara smiled through the tears, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. Marjorie stepped back, wiping her eyes again. Daniel, she said softly, I owe you an apology too. I twisted things I didn't understand. I made your life harder. You protected someone when I should have. Daniel simply nodded, accepting the apology without bitterness. Just do better, he said gently. Marjorie nodded again, her voice barely a whisper. I will. Sheriff Langley looked at Clara. You're not alone anymore, he told her. We'll make sure of that. Clara took a deep breath, and for the first time in years she believed those words. She turned to Daniel, her eyes soft and filled with gratitude that words couldn't hold. Thank you, she whispered, for opening the door, for believing me, for everything. Daniel shook his head gently. Anyone would have done the same. But Clara gave him a look that said she knew better. Not everyone would have opened the door. Not everyone would have let her in. Not everyone would have stood between her and danger. Emma wrapped her arms around Clara again, and this time Clara hugged her back with all the strength she had left. As the sheriff walked back to his car and Marjorie slowly made her way home, Clara stepped out onto the porch beside Daniel, breathing the morning air like a free woman for the first time. The sun warmed her bruised cheek, and she realized something she thought she had lost forever: hope. And in that quiet moment, standing beside the man who had saved her, Clara knew that one knock on the door had changed everything. Not just for her, but for the entire neighborhood.